Anatomy of arteries, capillaries, and veins. So, there are three main types of blood vessels. There are the arteries. Arteries are the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart, and they start off big and then branch smaller and smaller and smaller. The capillaries are the microscopic little blood vessels that allow for the exchange of materials between the bloodstream and the tissues. And then the veins are the blood vessels that carry blood to the heart, and the veins start off small and then fuse together, becoming bigger and bigger as they get to the heart. And it's worth noting that the color blue represents vessels carrying blood that's deoxygenated, and the color red represents vessels that carry blood that's oxygenated. However, blood is never blue. So again, vessels carrying blood that's deoxygenated are blue, and they can be arteries or veins, and vessels carrying blood that's oxygenated are colored red, and they also can be arteries or veins. Arteries. Arteries need to be strong, elastic vessels because they are dealing with high blood pressure. They have to be able to withstand the highest blood pressure in the body because they, of course, start directly after the blood leaves the heart. And as they become smaller and as they divide, the walls of those arteries become thinner and thinner until they become the microscopic arterioles, which are pretty minimal in their thickness. So when you look at an artery, you expect three layers. The innermost layer is the tunica interna, middle layer is tunica media, and the outer layer is the tunica externa. The tunica interna is composed of simple squamous epithelial tissue, so simple squamous endothelium, and some connective tissue as well. And this provides a very smooth inner lining to the blood vessels, to the arteries, that allow it to prevent blood clots because the smooth surface reduces friction, so blood vessels are less likely to stick to it. Tunica media is the middle layer. Tunica media is the thickest layer of arteries, and it is where you find the smooth muscle tissue. So the smooth muscle tissue can vasoconstrict, causing the space, the lumen within the artery to get smaller, or it can vasodilate. The muscle tissue relaxes, increasing the size of the lumen, the space within the artery. And this helps to regulate blood flow as well as blood pressure. And then the external tunica externa is composed of connective tissues that help to give the arteries overall shape and attach it to surrounding tissues so it stays in place. The arterioles are microscopic. They're at the very end of the carrying blood away from the heart. They are super thin, basically just a thin example of each of those three layers, and they lead to the capillaries. And here's a capillary. Capillary is as minimal for a blood vessel as you can get. It is basically just the simple squamous epithelium. So it is a super thin structure, and it allows fluids and other materials to pass in and out of it between the cells and sometimes through the cells. And their thin size allows for this fluid exchange. So again, they are just one thin cell thick. And their permeability can vary from locations. In some places in the body, they are much more permeable than others because in some places, like the liver and intestines, they have wider spaces between the endothelium. So capillary density also varies from place to place, so that tissues that have greater metabolic activity have more capillaries. So for instance, skeletal muscle tissue has a lot of capillaries to provide lots of glucose and oxygen to the muscle tissue. So at the beginning of the capillaries, as it branches off of an arteriole, is a smooth muscle tissue structure called the precapillary sphincter, and this controls the blood's ability to pass into the capillary. So it regulates blood flow into capillary beds, and this is dependent on oxygen levels in that area. So if, say, you're running really hard, then these precapillary sphincters will be dilated, relaxed in your leg muscles, but they might be constricted in your arm muscles because you don't need your arms and arm muscles functioning as much when you're using your legs to move. All right, so materials must be able to exit capillaries. So only small things, nutrients, oxygens, etc., are able to leave the capillary bed, and then different materials must be able to enter the capillaries. Again, small materials such as carbon dioxide, metabolic wastes such as urea and uric acid, and so on. So for this to happen, we are dealing with different kinds of gradients. So when blood first enters a capillary, we see that there's a high concentration of oxygen and nutrients, and a low concentration of oxygen and nutrients in the tissues surrounding the capillary. So we have this high concentration to low concentration, so oxygen and nutrients will diffuse out of the capillaries. We also have a small amount of blood pressure, referred to as hydrostatic pressure, because water, blood is mostly liquid portion of it's mostly water. And this will also be pushing to get blood moving, fluids moving. So the outward forces moving, trying to push materials out of the capillaries at their beginning is this number. You don't need to remember the number. However, there are also inward forces trying to push fluids back into the capillaries. This is the osmotic pressure, and this is because of the plasma proteins, especially the albumins, are basically making the blood more hypertonic. So some water wants to return to the blood capillaries. However, as you can see, the outward forces of hydrostatic pressure is much greater than the inward force of osmotic pressure, and so materials will leave the blood capillaries. When you get to the end of the blood capillary, things have changed. We still have that inward force, the osmotic pressure, trying to pull water and solutes dissolved in it into the blood capillaries. And we also have now a high concentration of carbon dioxide and waste materials wanting to diffuse from high concentration to low concentration. So water and the waste products are trying to enter the capillaries. And the outward force, the hydrostatic pressure, is much lower because fluids have left the blood capillaries. So hydrostatic pressure is now lower. And as you can see, it is now low enough that we have a greater push to have materials return to the capillaries. So at the ends of the capillaries, materials, including wastes, are returning to the bloodstream. So we have forces at the beginning of the blood capillaries, net movement sending things out of the blood capillaries, and then forces at the ends of the capillaries with a net movement of sending things back into the blood capillaries. However, they are not equal in amounts, as you can see. And this means that more fluid leaves capillaries than returns. And this slowly causes a buildup of fluids in the tissues of the body. And this could cause major problems. However, lucky for us, we have lymphatic vessels, such as the lymphatic capillaries, that are present in our tissues to collect that excess fluid. So they're there to solve that problem of more fluid leaving the bloodstream than returning to the bloodstream. Veins start off as microscopic structures called venules. Venules begin the returning of the blood to the heart. They're microscopic. And then they fuse and form the larger veins. And there are, surprise, surprise, 3 layers of tissue in veins, the tunica interna, tunica media, and tunica externa. However, veins are somewhat different from arteries. Start with veins have these little valves along their length, these two little pockets next to each other along the length of the veins that are part of the tunica interna. Then the tunica media, where we find the smooth muscle tissue, is much, much thinner in veins. So they have less muscle tissue. And the tunica externa is composed of about the same. So veins end up with their thinner walls having larger lumen, larger space for blood to be carried within the veins. And veins are operating at extremely low blood pressure, which is why they need the valves. The valves prevent blood from backing up and going the wrong direction. So blood will only be able to flow through the veins toward the heart. Thank you, valves. And veins also act as a blood reservoir because they are wider and there are more of them, so more of the blood is actually found in veins than in arteries. Again, here is a valve within a vein. As blood is flowing toward the heart, it passes through the valves and continue in the correct direction. However, if the blood tries to back up, then it'll fill the pockets, closing the valves, preventing backflow. Very similar to the semilunar veins, semilunar valves in the heart. Now, it is possible for veins to have their valves become slightly damaged so that the valves no longer close properly. When this happens, blood will pool in areas of the veins where the valves are not functioning properly, and they look rather bulging, and these are called varicose veins. So, for instance, this person has some rather severe varicose veins in their legs, and it turns out the varicose veins are actually somewhat painful, so they can require medical treatment. Again, here is a vein, here's an artery. You can clearly see the walls of the vein is much thinner than in the artery, and the lumen, the space within the vein, is much bigger than in the artery. And that is it for this part of the lecture.